Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. As always, I am your host, Elvis, and I would just like to start off by saying thank you very much for anyone who was able to make it through the last practice run episode. That was all my bad. I know it was echoey, it was a mess, unorganized, and those of you that gave your feedback and even had some notes and questions and comments about it, I really appreciate it. It's a lot. It means a lot to know that people were willing to really suffer through it, and that when I put out the call again for the questions for this episode, people actually gave more questions, some really interesting ones too, that really make it a lot more fun to do this. It's a lot easier when you're doing a solo kind of broadcast like this to know that people are listening, even if the quality isn't that great. And I hope that I have this microphone finally up and running and that the quality of that will be better than last time. Let's get some stuff out of the way then. I usually was planning on uploading this to YouTube, but one of the comments I had was to get a feed going, putting it on iTunes as well to make it easier for mobile listeners. So I'm going to get information for that right now. If you're listening to this on a mobile device, it is available on castbox.fm and also on iTunes. Both of these are titled Unsourced Wall Radio. Meanwhile, on YouTube, I'm just calling it Unsourced Wall. And if you're listening to it on either of those three, and since I'm not linking it back to my Twitter like I did last time by accident really, my Twitter handle is the Snickman with an underscore between the and Snickman. And no, I do not like Snickers bars. Everyone always asks that. Do you like Snickers? Like, no. Not that I hate them. They're not probably one of my favorite chocolates to get or to seek out. It's a Homestar Runner reference. That's what happens when you're 11 and you're making your first email account and you just finish binging like every single one of their shorts on their website like 3 times over. So that, and I decided to keep it for nostalgic reasons, and it's just ease of mind after that. But now that that's all out of the way, let's get into this week's topics, news, discussions, and questions. First off, we have new news about DC Comics' Doomsday Clock. A lot of news, actually. So much news, it is insane. Because it is really, really crazy how DC seems to be handling Doomsday Clock. Now, initially, it was meant to be one issue a month, how the standard of it, really. For 12 months, and it was going to be 1 year later type of thing. If anyone remembers when DC did that the last time, where Doomsday Clock would be set 1 year in the future of where every single, current at the time DC storyline was, so that eventually the DC storylines would reach up to the place where DC was in Doomsday Clock, with the Superman theory and everyone hating or being really mistrustful about metahumans and superheroes and what that meant. The conspiracy theory that Doomsday Clock in the first issue just puts out there in the back material, which sounded interesting. It would explain away why there was so much focus on probably like the Watchmen half, because we would have seen the backstory in the context of the DC half, which some people complained about when number 1 of this series came out. But then after the second issue, or third, I believe, they announced that it was going to be bi-monthly now, every other month. And so people have accused that of being the reason why there's so much of a reshuffling atmosphere going on now with it, with DC as a whole, with Metals ending and all these weird storylines like No Justice and the Justice League teams coming out after it. And then the other day, like maybe even yesterday morning, there was news that that Doomsday Clock 5 and 6 had been pushed back even another month, despite the bi-monthliness of it all, which is just like crazy. Like anyone trying to keep track of what things mean at this point, what the consequences of this series or where the timeline of this series is even going, I would tip my hat off to them if they're still trying to keep track of that. Even I can't keep track of all these shifts with just this one 12-issue series. But then this morning, even, or it might have been even late last night, so probably like in the same 24-hour cycle, DC came out by saying, oh wait, no, number 5 is not only going to be not only going to be not delayed another month, it's going to be coming out this month in May, the last week of May, rather than like the middle of June or whatever it was pushed back initially. So that was pretty funny. Like, what are they doing? And then you have a lot more people thinking that what does this mean for Bendis' Man of Steel? Because Superman will be a huge part of Doomsday Clock, and since Bendis has a propensity to just kind of shuffle in his own ideas despite whatever anyone else might have going on or might want to do, and they make such a big deal about Bendis and giving him a complete reign of the Superman line, or at least the main core Superman line, it's a bit like weird that Doomsday Clock, which was built up as like the big rebirth thing, what everything is heading toward, and what will launch so much more, like Legion of Superheroes, and maybe even another Superman series itself that was being rumored. It's weird. It's a bit weird to think of that. Because what does it mean? Is it even important anymore? Because I know a lot of people put emphasis on that, and some people are just enjoying it for the story it is, or not enjoying it for the story it is, or just discussing it as a single series in its vacuum. But it's just funny, like, what is the mismanagement going on here? What is the cause of it? What caused it to be first pushed back and then pushed up? Because I didn't hear any news about Doomsday Clock 6, which is also reported to be being pushed back that extra month. That hasn't been said to be pushed up a month either. So is that now pushed back? Is there be a 3-month gap now rather than just a 2-month gap for number 6? It's a huge tizzy. When is this series going to end? And what does this mean for Gary Frank or Legion of Superheroes or any of the things that are meant to spin off from this? Where does this thing lie? Where does, I guess the only really way we're going to figure out anything about Doomsday Clock is when it finally ends in hopefully 2020. I mean, the looks of it really makes it seem like we're not going to know, especially with no Justice and Bendis' Man of Steel and all this craziness. But that's not the single most crazy thing that happened with DC's news the past 2 days. There was also the announcement of, like, the formal announcement of DC's streaming service. Now, the streaming service has been in the works and been reported to be in the works for maybe even like 2 years now. I remember hearing about it 2 years ago when the Titans series that is now going to be on the streaming service was, I think, dropped as a pilot for TBS. It meant to be on TBS, I think, or TNT. But it never got the ground, and then like, okay, we're making a streaming service for all of our stuff, and all this stuff is going to be there, all these original content. And last year they said that Young Justice Season 3 was going to be on there as well. And so they made a formal announcement for their first slate of original content television shows. You have a Harley Quinn cartoon, and there was also reports of them trying to get Margot Robbie to be the voice of Harley Quinn on that show to keep some, I guess, brand consistency, or I think because Margot Robbie was one of like the most popular things about the Suicide Squad movie, despite the general lack of enthusiasm about it. But the other thing is that we have the Titans show and Justice Season 3, but the big shocker was that they've also apparently been working on a Swamp Thing live action show produced by James Wan and the showrunnered, I guess, by to Blumhouse. James Wan kind of standards. They've done things like The Conjuring and Annabelle, and pretty much just those Blumhouse spooky movies. And so that was a shock, because apparently in a tweet by James Wan, he'd been working on it for months. They've been developing it for months, and it's just like weird to think like, wait, Swamp Thing TV show, and I'm not adverse to that. If anything, I would hope it would be more like Len Wein's and Bernie Wrightson's series. I know everyone loves the Moore series, but that original stuff is pure kind of gothic horror, old school comic book horror aesthetic gold. Anton Arcane is fantastic, and all that like really kind of pulpy goodness to it is just so straight lined in that original run. But then this morning, there came out news that this DC streaming service, which is called DC Universe, has been filed for bankruptcy, which is funny. I mean, I think that it doesn't take much to think or to guess that it's probably some tax dodge tactic. It's very likely that they've announced 5 different shows, if more on the way, and trying to get big stars for it. But writing it in as bankruptcy, that's probably meant to be like more of a power move. If it was just outright bankruptcy right now, then that's just hilarious. That's just so ridiculous. But I wouldn't put it past it either or. I mean, I can't discount the fact that they probably mismanaged and they are bankrupt. I can't discount that, which is the weird part. I can't say that that's a blame false, so that's ridiculous, so that's too silly. It might have happened. I probably think they're just using it as a way to save money somewhere down the line, or somewhere in the books, as they say. But other than that, which you think would be a lot, but on Marvel's side, I really don't keep abreast of Marvel news. Like, whatever news they come out just always seems too boring. I'll probably talk about Marvel more down the line when we go to things that I've read this week or what came out this week. But the only thing that really caught my eye was the Ant-Man trailer, because I know that everyone's pretty wrapped up about Infinity War, and I'll get to my thoughts on that right after this. But Ant-Man and Captain Marvel, Marvel Cinematic Universe's Captain Marvel movie, are the in-between movies before Infinity War Part 2. So they have like a lot of burden, because Infinity War seems to have gone down really gangbusters with people, and it seems to have made a lot of impact. And so everyone's like wondering, Ant-Man, even I was wondering when I came out of Infinity War, like, okay, how is Ant-Man going to be received after this? How is it going to hold up? Because you leave Infinity War, I left Infinity War with a lot of very amped up feeling, like this is exciting, this is like really, really fun, and it's going out there. I know the first Ant-Man is actually my top 3 Marvel movies, MCU movies, because it is just a really wildly creative, inventive, fun movie. It's so solid, and you know that, and I said this before, I said this last time, that I love a superhero movie that is about itself, that is about the property of itself, that is focused, and it's an individual movie, just completely centered. And that's what Ant-Man was. It's definitely in my top 3 for MCU movies. So I was a bit worried, like, okay, like, is it going to be able to keep up, or is it going to be able to keep me excited after Infinity War raised that bar a bit higher? And then the trailer came out for Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it did. It does look really, really fun, even though it's made me realize. And I think that Infinity War, because it was so entertaining, it made me kind of lose sight of this a little bit. But because it was so entertaining, Ant-Man and the Wasp, when I saw the trailer, it removed that blindness that Infinity War had put on me, that cloud over my sight. Because Ant-Man and the Wasp, the trailer, reminded me, it brought me back down to earth. about how great a single superhero focused, just completely to itself, how great and how much I love that kind of thing. I know everyone loves like the crossovers and the grand epic events, but it doesn't mean anything without a solid single movie that is just about itself. I know I keep repeating itself and of itself and focus and centered, but that is really easy to take for granted. There are so many movies that don't do a good job conveying the property or conveying their version of the property as able to be standalone, as able to be watched in a void and enjoyed in a void without having to grasp out for things. And that was also my worry about Ant-Man the Wasp after Civil War came out, because Civil War, they used Ant-Man to like a really big effect. He wasn't the biggest part of that movie. I'm not trying to make a pun here, but he wasn't the biggest part of that movie. He didn't have a huge role in it, but he was used to some effect, and I thought that might have infringed or cut into stuff that I would have wanted to see in the sequel that should have been kept for the sequel. And this seems to have really done a great job keeping away from it. It doesn't disregard Civil War, it doesn't disregard the greater MCU, but it's great about just finding the character focus and solely being interested in that. And that is just the greatest thing. I love this trailer. Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly look really great in it. The designs are great. The interplay is great. The small moments that we've seen of them using the powers together and apart, and the varying tactics they have, it just looks like a really huge amount of fun, and I'm so excited for it. And I hope that this cracks the top 5, or maybe it might even be like the first good sequel to the first good first sequel at least to a Marvel movie. Because I know people love Winter Soldier. I don't. I think Captain America as a whole, and it's as the movie series in the MCU, has been a huge waste of potential. First Captain America is probably my number one all time MCU movie. I love that movie. I think it still holds up. It's solid. It's great, and it's focused, and it's centered. All that stuff I mentioned before. But then Winter Soldier is just, it's wasted potential. It could have done some interesting things, but in the end, it tries to be something it's not, and it just loses that sense of energy and enthusiasm I thought the first one had. And then it just got worse with Civil War, which is just a mess, story-wise and thematic. Excuse me, I meant to say story-wise and thematically. Yeah, I don't know how to fix the slight cutoff that happens sometimes, but I'll get on that for next time. But yeah, as I was saying, Civil War and Captain America, in a lot of these movies, they don't stick the landing to a sequel all that great. Even if you like Thor Ragnarok, you have to admit that Thor: The Dark World is not a great sequel. Neither was Iron Man 2, and everyone loves Iron Man as a character in the MCU, but Iron Man 2, it was derided, and rightfully so at the time, and it probably should still be as well. But this looks to be bucking that trend. And I didn't mention Guardians of the Galaxy because for me, the first one was not great, and so it could only go up in estimation. And for me, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, that's the only Guardian of the Galaxy that I care to think about. So that's why I didn't mention it. I meant from solid first movie to solid second movie. That's where my focus was. But let's get into Infinity War. What my thoughts about Infinity War was, and I won't be using or talking about any spoilers because I know that it's only been a week and there was a lot of intensity online about you can't just do spoilers or talk about spoilers a week in. People need time to see it, and so out of deference to them, I won't be talking spoilers. But not that you would need to spoil this movie. This movie, I think does a really good job just having weight to it. I know spoilers. A lot of people think that that will take the impact out of a movie, and I never thought that. I've never been in that mindset that a movie is only the events of that movie that matter. Movie is a lot of other things that go into it. The performances, the score, the directing, every single little part of a movie makes a movie. So you can tell me that this is how the movie ends, or this is what a character does, or this is how a character's final fate ends up being, and I wouldn't care. I'll watch it anyway, and as long as it's about whether it's conveyed well, executed excellently, or conveyed horribly and not done well at all. That's what matters to me. But moving along, Infinity War I thought was probably the most accurate screen from panel total adaptation of what an event crossover feels like. It's such a shock to see, especially after a lot of other things people have said were like that in the MCU before. You have Avengers 1, and everyone said like, oh, that's a comic book crossover, that's a big epic crossover, and I thought that was just like a horrible movie. And you have Civil War as well coming after that, like it's just a crossover, it's even based on a crossover, and like no, it's still just a horrible movie. And then you have Age of Ultron, which I don't think people like that much. I didn't like that much, and I never heard any praise for it either. And then you have all the DC CW shows. They do their their annual crossovers, which are also really weak. What these all have in common to me is that they have too much fluff per crossover effect, as it were, because crossover events in comics, especially modern ones, they don't really care if you're caught up. They're there for the events and the set pieces that happen. And the same was sort of true back then, especially if you go all the way back to Crisis on Infinite Earths. That book is entirely set piece after set piece, and there are moments in it that were set up that you would be at a loss to completely understand, because you have things like the Monitor, who was seeded before in different titles, before Crisis on Infinite Earths even started. So that was seeded before, and that it begins with him going, all right, here's my plan, let's put it into motion, and then things get into motion, things are happening, and there's like a montage of different events that are coalescing each issue in Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so there's very little real fat to it, at least in the first half. And that's the same with Infinity War, which we all know is part one, and there's no fat to it. And that's why I really enjoyed it, just set piece after set piece. But each set piece and the transitions between them are so have such an energy and momentum to them that the characters are still able to breathe and give a lively attitude and feel really fleshed out in an event sort of way. It's hard to explain, but the best way I've come up with it is that an event will always be about the moments for a character, and sometimes there are moments that a character is in the middle of in an event. That might be just a moment, it might just be a splash page, it might just be an action that takes up maybe like a panel or two, but sometimes in either really great events or really horrible events, moments like that can define a character for good or bad. It's that impact of being in an event and being in such a high stakes kind of story that really creates the necessary energy to make any single moment so powerful, even if they haven't been given a huge complete arc throughout the movie. It's those moments that really make that statement, and Infinity War is littered with them for many characters, even characters I didn't expect to really have that much of an impact. These characters really do, and so that's what was really interesting to me, because I'm not the biggest fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Apologies for my incorrect information last time. I kept saying 14 movies they've done. It was actually 19 at this point. That's including Infinity War, I think, right? Yeah. And out of those 19, I could only make up a top 7, and even then, it's conceding a lot of area for them. So conceding a lot, like, okay, these are ones that are pretty much established that everyone loves as good. So they're going to some of those spots are in my top 7. Like I said, Ant-Man is in the top 3, but that one I really believe deserves to be there. But that's the thing, is that this really does a lot of these characters that didn't have those great soul movies that maybe people did think they were great soul movies. I did not, and this really does them justice. It makes them interesting. It gives them a real kinetic and energetic wheel about them. It makes them pop in ways I didn't expect them to pop. And I guess we'll go into some questions that relate to this. That I gave out the call the other day, and there were some Infinity War questions that I got an answer, and it's how does one of the questions I got was, how does it handle the cast, and what was the tone like? And Infinity War, I think, did very smart thing by focusing only on a core few characters and having other characters kind of revolve around them and be in the shuffle with them. If you can't really, and not even larger events like Crisis on Infinite Earths, they can't really focus on all single characters. You might purport or brag about all these people in this movie, all these actors in this movie, but you can't really give them all the focus. So you don't give anyone, or even a large amount, like huge plot lines. I think the largest character plot line is Iron Man, because the focus is really on him and his character growth throughout the Marvel franchise at this point. But everyone else, like I said, gets these moments. They're small moments, but they're tightly wound into like different pathways. Like there's 3 or 4 like strict plot lines that each have like a cluster of characters developing them and really bringing them forth to the payoffs. And that was a smart thing to do. That's how it handles its cast. And that question was from Medea, who was also asking about the tone. And the tone, I think, is probably the best tone that any of the Marvel crossover movies has been like, because it's able to actually bring up the stakes that in a bigger way than something like Avengers or Avengers Age of Ultron or Civil War was able to, or pretty much any kind of soul movie that they've done as well, because the stakes in these movies you can't really get invested in because they're so unbalanced. There's never been a real sense of danger in most of these. Some of the ones that get it right, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where you feel like real kind of sorrow or fear about the characters and where they're going to end up, because they focus on the emotional quotient. This one actually focuses on like the actual physical threat, the actual kind of impact, and whether or not these people are going to die or not kind of threat that you don't really see in any of these movies. Like it gives it that kick. I think events need that kick. A lot of people I heard saying that this movie was too dark to start with, or that it went too far in some places, being much more threatening than the other movies that were known for being light. But no, event needs that kick. It Crisis on Infinite Earths, it starts with one of the first things you see is Pariah being unable to save, but just being forced to watch like children and their parents being destroyed and obliterated really by the antimatter wave in phases, and he can't save him. He tries to reach out, but he can't save him. You need that high impact, like, oh my god, things are going to get bad kind of feel to it, and Infinity War really captures that. It makes it so much more engaging, makes the things that they're trying to make hit harder, and that's why I didn't like it back then. I definitely don't like it now, because the best way I can put it is that Avengers, the first Avengers, if you read it as a comic book, it would be one of the most boring events you ever read. It'd be the most boring comic. You could not make it through that if it was a comic book and you read it like a real comic, issue by issue. You would like, nah, screw this. I'll keep with the tie-ins instead of this. Infinity War, it feels like a real comic. You're in a really good event comic. You're engaged, especially in the rising action. And that's the thing. This is part one. And let's go to the second question about Infinity War. This is from Egg Math. Does Infinity War do anything you can't see in comics? And the answer is no. It really doesn't. Anyway, the answer is, as I said, no, because it's only the first half. And the first half of any good event is usually what this movie does. It shows the threat. It builds up the actual stakes really well. Part two, even in good events, the second half, the heroic reprisal, the second wind of the heroes is always tricky to land. And even the best events, they don't really do it that well. There's always some minor hiccups there. And if Infinity War Part 2 is able to stick that landing, that would be something different that brings to the table, I think. But for now, this movie doesn't really do anything different that comic wouldn't be able to do. Now for our last Infinity War question. This one comes from Sunglass Pry, who I think of as a good friend and was also one of the co-hosts of my last podcast, Comic Chromosome. And so I'm really grateful that she even asked the question. Really, really honored about that. But her question was, what are my speculations for part 2 going from the Infinity Gauntlet comic from Jim Starlin and George Perez? And I had to say that there's not much really that I think they would be able to pull from the Infinity Gauntlet comic because they're so different. Thanos' motivations and the characters around him are so different. The best I could say that they could pull from the Infinity Gauntlet comic would be a certain aspect of his personality and his philosophy and rationale that they set up in Infinity War Part 1. There's something in that could lead to a similar plot beats, an important plot beat in Part 2. And I would not be surprised if they did that, because it would make complete sense, and rather than in the comic where it makes like very little sense. I think it's still ridiculed and derided and joked about today, this particular plot beat, and people who have read Infinity Gauntlet will know what I'm talking about. But other than that, the movies and the characters are so vastly different, and Jim Starlin is a bit of a madman, so there's lots of really crazy stuff in there as well. But there's other stuff, even from the ending of Infinity Gauntlet, that they pulled from and done in Part 1, so that just makes the disconnect even more so. But if I had to speculate anything, without giving spoilers away, I think there's a particular part of his psyche that they set up for Thanos that could lead to that plot beat, and I'm actually going to put that like my checklist, that this is probably what's going to happen. This is how they're going to do it. So if you're seeing Infinity War and you're thinking about like Thanos' inner motivations, I know a lot of people call him deep, but he has nuance. I wouldn't call him too deep. But other than that, I think that's going to play a really big role in how things and how the tide for the heroes comes back in Part 2. Just a little part of it, of his philosophy that maybe he overchecked, maybe he underchecked. But yeah. But overall, like I said, this Infinity War was a really good movie. It's something that you could feel like you've read. You could feel it could be a comic that you would enjoy, and that's really, I think that's something actually special about it. I'm not pulled in with the MCU. I don't think MCU as a whole is special. I don't think that like the lead up to Infinity War was all that great. There's a lot of inconsistencies, like from Iron Man to Avengers 2 to Guardians of the Galaxy to Thor Ragnarok to this. There's some plot threads that seem very on the fly, that don't seem very thought out, especially in retrospect, especially considering Thanos. So that's a bit weird. That's always gonna be like a little nagging thing. So it's impressive, but it's not like that special. Infinity War though is special, just for being a great event on screen that's totally like a good comic event would be. And that's why I'm going to segue into a little bit of a spotlight kind of segment, because there's only like one other comic book movie that I think really captured what a comic felt like, and it's unlike Infinity War. It's one of the comic book movies that pretty much no one likes, or pretty much the majority would criticize as being really, really bad, and that is Frank Miller's The Spirit, based on Will Eisner's The Spirit comic books. And that movie is probably one of the most accurate to atmosphere of a comic movies I've ever seen. It's not like the Will Eisner comics at all. That's not what I mean. Although there's more similarities than people would give it credit for. Frank Miller. Everyone always derides Frank Miller. Everyone always like really busts Miller's chops about like, oh, he was Eisner's friend. How could he do this? Eisner's creation. He said he was a fan. If he was a fan, why did he do this? Why did he make this horrible, laughable movie? And I think that's being unfair, because reading some of Eisner's Spirit stuff and then watching this movie, there's definitely a common thread. There's definitely common DNA to both of them. And I think that as a fan, that Miller was a fan. I won't doubt that. It's just that maybe he honed in on some things that he liked, and so he made a movie based around those things he liked. There's a silliness to both the movie and the comic that you see, and maybe Miller really liked that silliness, and so he made that movie just the crux of the silliness. But he made it as himself. He made it a Frank Miller story as well, because that's his brand. You wouldn't ask like Grant Morrison to write a strict Bizarro World story. No, he made Bizarro World in All-Star Superman his own take on it. So like I think that's pretty unfair as well. And as a Frank Miller comic, The Spirit, the movie, reads identically like it. I would not have been surprised if somewhere out there is like a bunch of sketches of like what amounts to pages of the movie actually having been like drafted as comics, because it feels like Miller had like a reboot or a miniseries for like Vertigo or something, for a Spirit's mini series, you know, and he like, oh, I got this opportunity to make a movie, so he just made a movie instead, because there are so many act breaks. Like there's probably like 5 or 6 act breaks in this movie that feel like, okay, this is where issue 1 ends and this is where issue 2 begins, and there's always little reviews, recaps, the way information is doled out, the expressiveness of stuff, the fun of it all. And it's like, no, it's really, as a comic book movie and as a Frank Miller story, I think it works really well. It's actually one of my favorite comic book movies, just because it feels like a comic, just because I like Miller's silliness. It's a very silly movie. Samuel L. Jackson and Gabriel Macht really carry that movie with just great energy to themselves. Like, even though Gabriel Macht as the Spirit has been trying to be more stoic, he's also a very goofy kind of stoic, and he's very silly. He's kind of a Dudley Do-Right kind of guy, even though he's like also trying to be noirish and a suave kind of Casanova. So it's like, it's just a lot of fun to me. But yeah, that's the thorough thread between Infinity War to The Spirit. Like, those are two really, really accurate. They give you that sense of like you're reading a comic, and that's just really great. And I hope that someday The Spirit gets a bit more gets a bit more love than it does right now, especially as a Miller production. People who love Miller's work, especially because Miller himself is not adverse to being silly either. But yeah, this is one of those things where I'm going to ask, like, do you have any ideas or comments about The Spirit, this movie? I mean, comment below on YouTube or tweet at me at the Stickman, like I said at the beginning. But moving along to what I read, and segueing from The Spirit to what I read this week, is Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius and The Rise of Alexander, #2 came out. This is what the 300 sequel movie, Rise of an Empire, was partially based on. I know Miller had been working on this for a long time, at least plot-wise. He was getting the plot sorted out, and that's what they sort of based the movie on a little bit. But the comic itself is half prequel, I'm guessing looking to be half integral, or at least a third prequel, third integral, third sequel to 300, following Xerxes is context, background to his rise to, I guess, his fall. And this is going to be 5 issues, and the second issue came out. And this stuff is prime Miller, honestly. It is amazing. Miller's style has fully honed that blockiness. Like, it's going to be his style is going to be blocky from now on, and whatever, it is still done extremely well. That style would under someone else would probably be a bit like strange looking, a bit unwieldy, but Miller plays it off like a champ, and the story is conveyed very, very stoically, very, very grounded in terms of like the narration being thrown at you. I was not a fan of 300. I appreciate the comic for its craft, but the story never really gripped me. I thought it was a bit I thought it was like, I was just not interested in it. It kind of bored me, to be honest, outside of the art, outside of like the style of it. But this actually kind of gripped me a little bit. The characters on Xerxes' Empire's side, stuff like, I'm going to say this wrong, but Aeschylus, yeah, I said that completely wrong, but one of the characters who's been in these 2 issues is probably one of the coolest characters I ever seen in a Miller comic. He's just this warrior who is obsessed with these spears he has and uses them at every single occasion he can, and it is amazing, and it's just a lot of fun, and I can't wait for this series to continue. It's definitely one of my top picks of the year. Right now, almost into the middle of the year. So yeah, it's great, and I really enjoy it. The other thing I read this week was the latest issue of Stray Bullets, Sunshine and Roses, number 34. And I know I've recommended Stray Bullets already last week, but this issue, I think, brings up a weird point for me. Is that even though I said last week that Stray Bullets, this Sunshine and Roses arc is a prequel, and so it's a perfect jumping on point, I feel like Lapin also realized that, because there was this sort of flash forward-y plot thread that he was doing. Not really a plot thread, but there was a setup for like this kind of flash forward type beat in the previous issue, like 4 or 5 issues ago, that I thought like, oh wow, he could be doing a flash forward soon. And then the solicit was like, for this issue, number 34, that the solicit was going to be about what that meant, what the flash forward meant, or these like future visions or something like that, even though it was just like two panels. So like, oh, that's going to be great. And now the issue is out, and it's not really a spoiler because, like I said, prequel, flash forward, those are all just in context and implied and inherent anyway. But we get to this issue, and it is just a regular issue. I think that maybe he realized that it would be taken away from the prequel stuff, but and so decided to divorce it completely, which is fine. Honestly, it would have been interesting to see, and I wonder if he's going to change those panels that set it up when the trade comes out, because the trade for this story arc is finally coming out. I had the first one right here, and it is brilliant. You can hear right there, I'm waving it around. But that does make it weird if there's payoff. I mean, if there's setup, but no payoff. So I wonder if he's going to change those panels, because he has changed panels once or twice, mainly to rectify like small continuity or art issues or art problems. So like that would be interesting to see. I wonder if he's going to change that, or if he's maybe just push that forward to a different issue, which he's also done. But the issue, this issue was really, really great. We only have like 6 more issues to go in this story arc. We're guessing the first volume, like I said, it has the first 8 issues, and we're on 34. So everyone's just kind of guessing that maybe the last issue of the story will be 40 to make it 5 even 8-issue trades for the entire thing. So that'll be fun. But other than that, let's get into general questions. The first question we have is from last week. Someone who read, who listened last week. Let me find out their name right now. It's a frequent follower of mine, who I really hope I find the name of, because like I have all the other ones. This is just the first one that Uh, do, do, do. Just wait a bit. Let's see. Here we go. It is Moon at Guva TM. That's his Twitter handle, and their question was, how do you do right with continuity? How do you do wrong with it? And that's in relation to my Mr. Miracle question. My Mr. Miracle rant last week, which is fine, which is fair. Honestly, it's a fair question because I made a point about how it's stuff we've seen before, and also the continuity issues I thought about the Piss Core comic, X-Men Grand Design, which I lauded for its continuity, while I disliked Mr. Miracle because it was shoddy with it. And that's the thing, is that I don't really like the Piss Core comic because of the continuity. That I don't think it does continuity well. It's because it does the creator vision of the continuity and is solely about that. It is completely focused on the creator side. This is the creator's entire idea of the continuity. And with Mr. Miracle, it tries to have its cake and eat it. It's trying to be a new take, but then it has all this other stuff from previous takes that is continuity based. And Tom King's like, no, this is saying continuity can have ramifications. And so you have this radical change or it's not so radical, but it's a distinct change. And it doesn't work because the rest of it isn't modernized or the rest of it isn't updated to fit with that change. So it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and it just comes off really, really messy and unthought out, unfleshed out. That's one of my main problems with the Miracle, is that it tries to be different, but it doesn't try to be different enough, because it still tries to like harken back to the Kirby stuff, and then you have like the old Mr. Miracle Kirby narrations splattered throughout these new issues. Like, okay, we get it, like we understand, but what are you trying to do? The juxtaposition doesn't work because you're being very dissonant with like every single thing you're putting in, and that's how I feel about like Tom King. But if you're using continuity, the continuity has to like buffer the story, doesn't it? And that it has to aid. And I know that's the most simple answer, but that's really how it is. And then the rest is up to how well you implement it. And that's solely on like a writer basis. It's about the skill of the writer. Continuity is there to help you, or help the writer, like find out things to do. Like, where do you go from here? If I took this into account, where do I go from there? Which is tricky. I have to say, I'm not going to say it's the easiest thing, but it's gotta be done better than Mr. Miracle. I'm not saying that Grand Design is the benchmark either, because as I said, that's completely just about Piss Core's ideas, and which is fine. And I actually really, really enjoy his ideas. I really admire that he's going at it. But our next question again comes from Sunglass Pry, and it's about the Power Rangers comics from Boom, I think. Yeah, Boom. And whether I have been following them, and what I think about the Shattered Grid event. And so I wasn't following them, but I did binge them after getting this question, and I made it all the way to the Shattered Grid event, completely up to date with the Power Rangers comics. But the thing is that I wasn't really following them at all. They weren't of interest to me, and Sunglass probably knows that I enjoy Power Rangers. Not like every season. I'm not really a fanatic about it. I'm not really deep into it, but I enjoy it, and I enjoy when I hear good news. And if a series or if a particular season is good, I'll watch it. But the comics, I just wasn't interested in, because it feels like I don't care about going back and revisiting this team in a comic book adventure. I think that as a whole, their story is kind of done, and I wouldn't really care about following them because it feels like a redo. I know the stories are new, but it just feels like going back and redoing things with redoing these characters. And like that was my preconception before I binged them, and and that's only changed a little bit after reading them, because I read the first arc, and after the first arc, I thought, well, that was a lot more interesting than I expected it to be. I thought like it was a great attempt at modernizing the concept and these characters, while still harkening back to the original stuff, like so still keeping that tone. And that's what really struck me about the rest of it, and why I really don't like it that much after that first initial arc, because it both tries too much and yet keeps stalling itself too much, and the events that happen don't really warrant all this menagerie of little things. Like here's an example. After the first arc, which is a good first adventure, it's nice and it's very exciting. It's a very exciting small little first mission. Like, okay, so we're seeing all these new characters. We're seeing these updates of them, of the classic MMPR cast and their environment. So that's nice. And then the next arc immediately is just like setting up like this secret villain who always speaks in vagaries and like pronoun games, and like, oh, why not just keep more time building up this team? And I know the team gets built up during this arc, but it just feels like you're pulling attention away to obviously, and in a very cliche way, set up something else. And then the next arc after that is like an alternate future thing, where like, okay, but I'm still trying to get used to like your new modern version of this team. So like a lot of this impact is lost if you do like this alternate timeline thing, because like, oh wow, I guess there's some contrast, but you give me some time to really settle down and get a handle on this team. You're trying too much. And then it sets up like another plot point, but then it kind of stalls for like the longest time until Shattered Grid, where that is finally picked up again. And I thought that stalling was probably was actually really boring. It was a really boring stretch of issues. And I'm like, oh wow, this has really lost all that potential. And Shattered Grid itself isn't that great an idea. It could have built up Shattered Grid a lot better if you played it more naturally, but it felt really forced in the run up to it. And Shattered Grid, the premise of Shattered Grid is just an okay premise, and so the fact that it's also trying to bring in all these other series and casts and characters together as like one major meta event, like on the level of Crisis on Infinite Earths, right? This feels very hollow, because like, oh, I guess this one thing meant like had such repercussions and stuff like that, but like I don't like focus. That's like, if there's one theme I've been trying to hammer in this entire podcast, this entire episode, is that focus on something. All right, if you're gonna make like a Shattered Grid event, maybe do it like really way in the future, or don't waste so much time on all this kind of really hacky, sticky kind of stuff, even though there's obvious potential and there's some great little moments scattered throughout. And that's what I felt was a shame. And one of the biggest shames, though, was that, like I said, I'm not interested in just revisiting these characters. I'm not, especially in comic form, that is so clearly trying to be like, oh right, it's that version. Because of Shattered Grid, it becomes more clear that this is that version. Maybe I need a new take on that version, but because you see all the other Time Force Rangers or RPM Rangers or In Space Rangers, then that this is meant to be like the MMPR Rangers that we've known and liked, and even that we've known and grown up with. But then, so that kind of takes away from the fact that it's something new. That it's meant to be like something a bit more honed down, which I felt like that kind of devalues it a little bit, because it becomes like another tie-in comic instead of just like a new vision, instead of just like a honed down vision of it. But the biggest shame was that if I said, want something new, something bit, if I was going to read a tie-in comic for Power Rangers, I would want something a little bit different, something that was just completely about the comic, that isn't trying to be like tied into a series franchise even. And there's one issue during that stretch between the plot point being set up and then Shattered Grid finally happening that introduces like an entirely different Ranger team. And I thought like I would have read a comic about them. They seem, because they're so unformed, they're so new, and there's nothing really known about them and at all. as characters, they could have been developed so much more, and that's what interests me about maybe reading a Power Rangers comic, But it's not bad, and I understand why people like it. I just think that the entire comic line is kind of a waste of potential, and like I'm not trying to be down on it. The first arc, at least, is really worth checking out, and if you're interested, then check out the second arc and see if it works for you. It didn't work for me, but it might work for you. Anyway, our next question is from Medea. What are my wishes and hopes for the publishers that I'm reading right now, like Image or any other, or DC or Marvel, or those kinds of publishers? Well, that's a really good one, because it lets me play around with like my grab bag wish list of things that are never going to happen. But I think foremost, to tie it back to Miller again, because I mentioned him quite a bit in this podcast, I would honestly give an arm and a leg for All-Star Batman and Robin to be finished. That is probably my favorite Batman story ever written, because, like I said, Miller is silly. He can be ridiculous, he can be fun, and All-Star Batman and Robin is all of that. Like, I know people see the script for Batman and Robin, All-Star Batman and Robin issue 1, and he's like, oh, see, Frank Miller is a lecherous old man, and he's out of touch, he's a creep. I read that script and I think, like, Frank Miller is trying to have some fun. He's just trying to be silly with it. He's not taking it seriously. He's like, I'm shameless. Draw Vicky Vale's in her lingerie. Like, he's like, yeah, he's like, let's be ridiculous. Let's be crazy in this series, and then it's only compounded when he says, draw Bruce Wayne like Dick Sprang, and then have him talk about how much he hates Dick Grayson and calls him a punk. It's just fun. It's a lot of fun. And so that's why I think it kind of gets a unfair shake, and because it's just so funny. It's not so serious. It's not, and people always take it like at face value, when it's always been so clear to me, especially with that script that everyone always takes at face value. That's always been just a very entertaining look at Batman. It's probably one of my favorite looks at Batman. But I would love it to see it continue. I'd love to see it conclude. We never really got more of that Joker, and it really left off on a cliffhanger of sorts. Great moments, though. There's some great moments in that series, especially the cemetery scene, which has one of my favorite lines in any Batman comic. And I was closed out with All-Star Batman and Robin right here. It's Batman and Robin crying at Dick Grayson's parents' graves, and the narration says, we mourn lives lost, including our own, because now they're set in these roles chosen for them that they didn't choose. But any other publishing wishes I would have would be, I guess, Garth Ennis finally finishing Cross, the last Cross miniseries that he announced like 3 or 4 years ago, that has never seen print. Who knows what the status on that is? Cross itself was dead for 2 years. It's coming back sometime. They announced a new miniseries that must be out in March, but it's been pushed back to like July. So who knows? I mean, I would love to see that final Cross miniseries from Garth Ennis. It must be his final Cross story, but you've never seen, with Avatar probably going down the drains, because of rumored, and I've spread this rumor as well, because it seems so obvious to me that there's some financial trouble there, and some probably business management trouble at Avatar Press that is really, really taking them down the gutter. And so it might never come to pass, and All-Star Batman and Robin continuing might never come to pass either. But to answer Medea's question, those would be the two that I would really, really love to see come to fruition. And I think that's it for all the questions. Let me just double check, just so I don't miss anything. But I honestly, like I said at the start, I really appreciate all these questions. And I don't know if I credited it before. Maybe I miscredited it, but Medea was also the one who asked the large cast and tone of Infinity War question. I might have misattributed it. If I did, I'm sorry. But other than that, thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope to see you next week. Like I said, if you have any thoughts on this episode, any kind of rebuttals, I'll be more than happy to look at any comments or questions about those.